All right, welcome back, everybody. I just said to Randy that everybody likes getting out of class a little early, so I think we're probably going to finish a little early today. So, um, we got one more lecture. So as we've hinted a couple times, there's going to be a lot of things going on in early 2025 around April. And one of those things is going to be a new exhibit on the visit of Lafayette to New Orleans at the Cabildo. Randy, on the second floor and in the on the two floors of the Arsenal.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. So it's three rooms within the Cabildo.
Let
Um,
me describe it, okay?
that's right.
All
All
right.
right, and then so he'll be Dr. Randolph Delehanty, who is the guest curator for the exhibit, is going to tell us about that. And thank you, Randy, for being here today.
Thank you. Well, it's been a very informative symposium, and you've gathered a lot of knowledgeable people on Lafayette and his visit. And my role is as a guest curator for the Louisiana State Museum. And we are presenting an exhibit that will open on April 10th of this coming year. The title of the exhibit is Bienvenue à Général Lafayette, Welcome General Lafayette, commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Marquis de Lafayette's visit to Louisiana. One of the things that will make our exhibit different from others is that will actually take place in the rooms that Lafayette himself occupied while he was here in New Orleans in April of 1825. Our exhibit will consist of 3 galleries. The first gallery will be in the Sala Capitular, which was the formal room on the main floor of the Cabildo. And in that room, I will present the arc of Lafayette's life, which has been well described by many of the speakers today. We'll go from his birth to his death. I will try to compartmentalize his life in 4 stages as he moves from youth and the American Revolution, which is why he is known in our country, to his return to France, his involvement in the French Revolution, which was very active. He was a key figure in the French Revolution. Then he flees right before Robespierre and the Terror. He comes back to France, and he has more political involvement in the later stage of French political life. And he becomes not just the hero of 2 worlds, but really the hero of liberty around the world. And the later stage of his political career in France is quite fascinating, and I will include that in this arc of his life. What's remarkable about Lafayette, I think, as a figure in history, he lives through some of the most tumultuous moments that have ever occurred in Western history. The American Revolution, of course, and then the French Revolution, which goes through certain stages and becomes more and more radical. His role in the drafting of the rights of man and the citizen are his high point intellectually and his contribution to world history. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights has its root in that document. That document was drafted by Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson in Paris. So the connection there between the New World and the Old World, if you will, and the new way of thinking, because the idea of human equality was a radical idea. We cannot perceive how radical that was. They were living in the 18th century in a hierarchical society where you had the aristocrats, the clergy, the nobility, the merchants, the workers, and in this country, the slaves completely outside the political system. So the idea of human equality, which is codified in the Declaration of Human Rights during the French Revolution, is a turning point in history. It is a remarkable moment. And Lafayette was the one who drafted it, as I say, with Thomas Jefferson. The story in France continues with Napoleon. Lafayette was deeply opposed to the authoritarian nature of Napoleon's regime. When he came back from prison in Prussia, Napoleon essentially forced him to retire to his estate. Napoleon tried to recruit Lafayette because Lafayette's reputation was so high that it would bring glory to Napoleon. Lafayette refused to cooperate because it was not the liberty that he believed the French people deserved. So he retires to his estate, but he eventually becomes involved in French politics later. And he is one of the first of the French to demand that Napoleon step down after the defeat at Waterloo. He enters the French Parliament. He becomes the spokesman for the liberal aristocrats, and he tries to steer a middle course in a time when there was no middle. There were only extremes. What's remarkable in his life is the evenness, as that Chateaubriand quote that we saw earlier today said. Lafayette tried to walk a straight path in a time when that was actually not possible to do. So what he shows us in his life is the consistency of his values. The politics change. They go from absolute monarchy to the radical revolution in France, to the restoration of the royalty. The Bourbons come back. Napoleon had come in before that. Throughout all of these changes, Lafayette continues his defense of human rights, freedom of the press, freedom of religious observation, and then later in his life, equality for women. And by the 1830s, he is advocating the vote for women in France, which doesn't come until much later, but Lafayette sees that as the future. Previous to that, Lafayette was able to see beyond his times. While he was in the United States, the first people he met were slaves on the coast of South Carolina. He sees slavery in the United States, and he understands the fundamental contradiction between a nation that proclaims that all men are created equal and an economic and social system that was anything but equality. Lafayette and his generation, and this includes Jefferson and Washington to some degree, and some of the other founders, understood the dilemma of slavery. They didn't have an answer. Lafayette's answer, proposed answer, was gradual emancipation, not an immediate and sudden end to slavery, but first ending the slave trade, and then within slave societies, be they French colonies or the United States, that slavery would be phased out through a system of gradual emancipation. They couldn't really conceive, the people of these generations, they could not conceive equality between the blacks and the whites as a social reality. Lafayette could see it as the dignity of individual people. And so, for example, Lafayette's response when he comes to the United States, even when on his triumphal visit, as it's called, he brings up the issue of slavery with Jefferson, with Madison. When he comes to New Orleans, he writes a famous letter to his daughters about his fascination with Louisiana and with New Orleans and his dread of slavery that he sees in this society. So The way to look at him as a figure in history is a man who could see what was needed. He could see what the future had to be, that liberty had to be extended. It had to be extended to the enslaved. It had to be extended to women who were barred from political office and from voting. So we see him as a prophet. And although he never reaches the promised land, he knows what it should be. So the first gallery in the Cabildo will be in the Sala Capitular, and it will look at the arc of his life. And I will try to demonstrate the continuity of his value of liberty, how it grows over time. When he comes here as a young man at 18, he doesn't have these advanced ideas. He's looking for what the French call glory, la gloire. He wants to be distinguished in battle because that was the heritage of his family. But he grows. One of the most interesting moments of the journal that was kept of his visit when he returns to the United States in the 1820s is that Lafayette sees that on an American steamboat, there's no distinction of rank. Everybody sleeps on the floor. He's rather amazed at that. He loves the Americans because they practice democracy and equality, at least among the white population. The second gallery, which will be in the Arsenal and adjoins the Cabildo, I'm calling that Creoles, Anglos, and Others. What I will do in that gallery, I will introduce Lafayette in New Orleans in 1825, and I want to show the context of the society that he enters. It's a very complex society. You have, among the French speakers, a division between the old-time Creoles, the colonial generations, if you will. That's the people who are living in the French Quarter, who are in a complex relationship with what they call the foreign French. Those are people who leave the Haitian Revolution and come to Louisiana, double the population of New Orleans. There are French who continue to come from France to Louisiana. They bring ideas of the French Revolution, of equality and liberty with them. They re-energize French culture within the city of New Orleans by the 1820s. They are editors, they are lawyers, they are used to political participation. So there's a difference within the French-speaking community. They are facing radical change as the Anglos, after the Louisiana Purchase after 1803, begin to come to New Orleans and to Louisiana. And the people that we call the Anglos, or the Americans, they are not unified either. They come either from the free states in the north, New England and Boston, New York, or they come from the slave states, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, significant movement of Anglos from the upper South to the lower South. Complicating this situation between the Anglos and the Creoles, immigrants from Europe are starting to come to New Orleans in significant numbers, especially the Irish, and then the Germans, and then other Europeans as well. They become eventually the swing vote between the Creoles and the Anglos. So what I'm going to do in the second gallery, which I am calling Creoles, Anglos, and Others, is to show the context, the society that Lafayette entered in 1825. Because of Lafayette's characteristics as a person, which was to be a peacemaker, to be a moderator, to be a bridge, he physically does that while he is in New Orleans. He does it between the Anglos and the French. For example, we were shown the theaters that Lafayette attended. Well, there were two theaters. One was the English-speaking theater. The other was the French-speaking theater. Which one would he attend first? They decided by flipping a coin. They did it by lot. Lafayette wanted to be even. So he spent the one night in one theater and then the second half of the night in the other theater. There were balls and there were receptions, and Lafayette tried to balance. He also tried to balance, as we have heard several people mention, his respect for the free people of color, and actually for people of color in general, not just the free, but the slaves as well. So, for example, when the militia came to pay their respects to Lafayette here in New Orleans, they were divided by race, and there was contention between the white militia and the free people of color militia. Lafayette made it a point to treat them equally. This was done through his actions, done through his courtesy. This was a radical moment for the city of New Orleans. This was unusual. And so we see him in the frame of the shift in New Orleans. I will take that gallery a little bit further to the early 1830s, when, as we saw, the city is divided into three municipalities. And we'll explain something of that in the gallery. Because the Creoles and the Anglos don't actually meld, and they eventually have to temporarily divide the city before they reunited. A sub-theme, which makes the complex even more complex, is that the division between Creole and Anglo is not absolute. There is intermarriage. There are families here in New Orleans today, many of them supporters of this exhibit, by the way, who are the result of the marriage of Anglos and Creoles. So there's a blurring. Governor Claiborne is a good example of that. The Villery family is another good example of this. It's a remarkably textured story. In that #2 gallery, I have the advantage of working with the portrait collection at the Louisiana State Museum, which is an outstanding collection of portraits. Now, it was only the elite that could afford to have oil portraits, but even among the elite, the divisions are clear. And so I'm going to try to create a conversation in that gallery of the Creoles, the Anglos, their tensions, and their interconnections. So I think that this will make a rich experience for people to understand more deeply the history of New Orleans and then Lafayette's moment in our history. Then the third gallery will look at his journey, which most of the people today have been referring to, the triumphal journey, his visit to all the states in the United States. And what I'm working on, and Steve McClansky and I are perfecting this, I'm thinking of it as podcasts from 1825. The book that Mr. Hoffman translated, The Journey that Lafayette took, which was meticulously recorded and for political reasons to send reports back to Paris to keep Lafayette's image alive in Paris while he was in America, because he was still in politics at this point in France. His adventures on that journey are really dramatic. There's a shipwreck. He's in the Congress at the most contested election probably in our history, except the Hayes-Tilden election. He's on the scene in moments of our history. And the America that he travels through, because he goes to every single state, there are 24 of them at that point, The America that he travels through on its 50th anniversary of independence is a remarkable country. It's optimistic, it's growing, it's changing, it's assimilating immigrants, it's moving, it's shifting from east to west. And Lafayette travels through that. And in his journals, which I will excerpt in gallery number 3, which is his journey in America, we see a picture of America at a really remarkable moment. It is before the tensions that will split the country apart in the 1850s and lead to the Civil War. We see a moment of America in the 1820s and 30s, a remarkable optimism, incredible growth. People are aware that the country is a success, which wasn't exactly clear during the Revolution, how this would all pan out. So I'm calling those podcasts from 1825. I'll see how we can do that. I'm seeing little nooks where you would listen to pieces of the journal that was kept on Lafayette's journey. So those will be the 3 parts of the exhibit: the arc of his life, the situation that he enters in New Orleans, the society of New Orleans in 1825, and then the larger view, America in 1825, as Lafayette saw it on his trip. On his trip, he attended banquets and parades and all the rest of it, but he and Lavoisier, his secretary, were keenly aware. They were writing a report. They were drawing a picture of the new Republic of America and of its successes. But Lafayette, being Lafayette, could see the dark side as well. One of the most interesting moments in his journey was in Alabama, where he meets the Creek Nation, the indigenous people, who 10 years later will be expelled by Andrew Jackson. And Lafayette, with his great empathy for the indigenous tribes in America, can see what is happening on the negative side of the expansion of the United States, and that is the removal of the native peoples, of the indigenous peoples. So it's a sophisticated view that he has. He sees the positive, and he also sees what is not so positive in the expansion. So I think this exhibit is going to have many levels. It will show us Lafayette as a kind of a lens through which we see America in 1825 in particular, 1824, 1825. I should mention that we should thank the Lieutenant Governor, Billy Nungasser, who is the head of the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, Rebecca Mackey, who is the director of the Louisiana State Museum, especially Stephen McClansky, who is in the museum, and I'm working closely with him, and the rest of the staff. We have done an exhibit before. We did the Pontalba exhibit in 2018, which was a wonderful experience, and I know that this exhibit will be equally positive for me, and I hope for the museum as well. We are also thankful for the participation of the Friends of Lafayette, who have been very helpful in securing and locating artifacts, and to the Spirit of 76 chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution, who are also helping us with this exhibit. This exhibit is the collaboration of not just our institution, but other institutions as well. And I should mention some of the sources of our artifacts, because the Louisiana State Museum, although it has great portraits, does not have a lot of Lafayette artifacts. So we have reached out, and we have had very good success with Washington and Lee University in Virginia, from which we hope to get the Peel portrait, which is one of the finest portraits of Lafayette. The American Revolution Institute of the Society of Cincinnati in Washington is lending us artifacts. The New York Historical Society is lending from their collection, which is a very good collection of artifacts of Lafayette's visit. Cornell University Library, which has a famous collection of Lafayette papers and his death mask as well. The Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia is helping us. And of course, the Louisiana State Portrait Collection, Louisiana State Museum Portrait Collection. And we are working with others, the Chambron Foundation in Paris, which manages La Grange, which was Lafayette's estate, is lending us important artifacts. We are working on other French and American sources as well. The exhibit is in process, and it will change and it will evolve. That's been my experience in all of these endeavors, with the cooperation and knowledge of other people. Today's symposium has been very helpful to me as a kind of review of what I've already been learning about Lafayette. And we want to revive people's appreciation of this man. We will be looking for docents for the exhibit. I will be training the docents. If you are listening to this symposium, contact Jason Strada, and he and the Friends of Lafayette will be our support and our auxiliary in this. We will create educational programs with Mr. Cook at the Louisiana State Museum and the Education Department, because we want to make this relevant and accessible to the students here in our region. The museum is always interested in the next generation. And you saw in the last presentation a picture of the Triumphal Arch. Well, the most extraordinary thing that New Orleans produced during Lafayette's visit was a temporary triumphal arch that was 63 feet tall. Now, that's like a 6-story building. It was placed in the middle of what is now Jackson Square, then the Place d'Armes. We can't replicate a 63-foot triumphal arch, but we will make a recall, like a stage flat, which we will attach to the front of the Cabildo as the entrance to the exhibit. It was the first piece of secular sculpture here in New Orleans. It's a very interesting piece. It's bilingual, as was pointed out. It's in English and French. It has 2 sides, and it will be the I hope, a little bit of eye candy on the outside to bring people into the museum to see the exhibit. So what else? We will open to the public on April the 10th, 2025, and the exhibit will be up for 10 months. And again, the title of it is Bienvenue à Général Lafayette. Welcome, General Lafayette. And we look forward to your attendance as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. This is going to be exciting. You know, I think we just learned so much today in all of these all these lectures, and then to hear you talk about how you've learned as well, just shows you how useful something like this can be early on. If anybody has any questions, please please put them in the chat, and see if we have anything in there. Randy, do you see that whiskey flask right there in the chat?
No, I don't. Where do I have to go? I don't see it. Open the chat.
Well, let me ask you a question related to that.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of artifacts were you surprised to find in what that the Louisiana State Museum did have that you did not have to ask for from around the country?
We don't have a lot of specifically Lafayette material. What we do have are wonderful portraits of Anglos and Creoles of that era, which I will use in gallery number 2. So that is why we have reached out to these other institutions for specific Lafayette material.
Mhm.
Most of that was manufactured in the North. Some of it was actually manufactured in England, the Staffordshire ware in particular. But there was a wave of souvenirs. We'll have a taste of that.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Randy, I want to thank you so much, and we're looking forward to April 14th, correct?
April
It,
10th, it
April
opens.
10th is the opening. Yeah, April 14th is the day of the um of the speaker, correct?
There are other events that will precede the public opening, but the
Yeah,
public opening is April
is
10th.
April 10th. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. Mary Beth says we're happy to lend you the flask if you need the flask.
Okay, we'll look at it.
If you just Google Randolph Delehanty, you can find his email, his website, and his email address, and send him a picture. But I want to thank everybody for participating today. I hope you enjoyed it. You're out 20 minutes early. So thank you so much, and we appreciate it. And Randy, thanks again so much. We look forward to your exhibit.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.